All right, and we're live from the dungeon basement. All right, so last episode, I'm struggling to fully remember, but I think the work was mostly going through probably like some set of testing, kind of going through what it looks like when you haven't run your test suites for a few weeks. Even if you have like it set up on pull requests, um, you should always be trying to look for these green check marks. I'm fairly sure I've done some unit of work in between last live stream session and now, which kind of looked like sometimes you can get into some kind of version of testing hell. So, like if I go into this action that is set up for testing, maybe not on this is the most unitized in a way, the most unitized of all my repositories for the microhost product. How could I even run workflow? I wonder if we could view it. That's what we want right here. So sometimes what can happen is like so if we look at the nuts and bolts of a typical GitHub action, you're a lot of times checking out code from GitHub. And in this case, we can see that I think I'm not okay. I am specifying the branch here, specifying the main branch. So it's basically pulling in. So for this, because it's testing the file system, it pulls in whatever ref, meaning the latest commit of whatever branch is being tested. For the rest of these, it's if I went to say server internal, let's go, because basically when you're assembling, because this software self-defines how it performs tests, they're at these base repos. It runs a little different. So this is more of like the standard testing action file. So it basically pulls in the file system, the quality assurance library, the server library, and then pretty much with those three repositories, you're able to run every combination of not only like grepping for all of your test files, but then just running front end tests against them, puppeteer tests, unit tests, what have you. But sometimes it can get into a state that's like kind of weird, where I think I ran into something where the feature branch was failing, and because it was pulling into from the main branch of like one of these libraries, the main branch, something about like the configuration was broken no matter what, and there's no way to get that nice green check mark, which everyone should want for prior to merging. I'm kind of laughing because somehow these are terrible, really awful commit messages, which there's a whole separate topic that could be gotten into. That how these wound up here is kind of a mistake, because really what it should look like, August 25th, that's probably not even latest. I'll go in retroactively before getting on some code today. Just double check where this is at. I care about the package lock file. It's just a to-do message, or just a removal message, so not a big deal. 12 days ago. So, let's see. Let's just do a test. So commit messages like that, sometimes you always want to, and I'm sure for many people watching this, it's just obvious, and in a way, you can't really think of any of this stuff as the end of the world. But let's see. So this is just some silly pull request that diffs on the package lock, something trivial, and 2 to-do messages. And when you merge it, So the reason that those commit messages showed up right here that should not be here is because it's doing what's called a merge commit, and it really needed to be a squash and merge, which is my bad. So I prefer personally to see squashed commits. I don't want to see the full merge history in a feature branch, and so somehow I neglected in the course of maybe it's just this repo, maybe it's organization wide, I just don't know. So if we go back here, branches, pull requests, does that exist? We try to do an edit, add a protection, squash, nope. General, squash. Don't want merge commits, defaults. I don't really like, let me think about this, rebase merging. I think rebase and squash are pretty similar. But generally speaking, like sometimes if you're writing a feature branch, you're going to pound commit messages that look like FML, oh my god, updates, because you're just trying to like push the code and run it, for instance, in the test runner. Squash merges, basically most of the time when I'm like merging a pull request, my typical practice is like I'll go through and then I'll write a commit message after manually reviewing the code. Sometimes if I'm like doing meaningful commits, that kind of gets me some distance, but then I will typically have like at least 20% of my commits are just like, oh my god, updates, FML, and similar. And you just ideally don't want stuff like that going on in your commit history. So that's just bad maintenance on my part. Whoops. But I don't even want to get into in this live video like my naming structure. I haven't really made any decisions while live coding about. In fact, in a lot of ways, haven't made decisions about how much I talk about industry experience. But why? I have to be quite sure. But it's fine, I guess. Don't want. Let's see if we can do this organization wide though. So in other words, like I've seen some pretty, going back to how I have these like repos marked as internal, I have seen, a handful of different patterns of forking and pushing changes upstream, from feature branches. Let's say from an internal repository to something that's more like public facing. Um, there's good and bad ways to do that. I think a lot of developers would like to see a nice change log. I believe I covered in the last video reviewing on ClickUp. I just happen to like ClickUp better than using using GitHub as an issue tracker. But anyway, that's not supposed to be. The only reason this one is red, I think I've covered this before, is just because sometimes on Mac it's like flaky and it just times out, and I think that's like a GitHub issue, because in other words, if I'm developing on a Mac and it runs, I'm just not concerned. And then for whatever reason, both your Mac and your Windows test runners on GitHub are just more expensive, and they just both seem subject to like weirdness. So like the Mac or the Windows, I think my requirement for Windows is you have to have Windows subsystem for Linux, which is a pretty common tool. I think most people get by with just installing Git Bash and then running that when they develop. But it just doesn't seem like GitHub provides that to you out of the box. So it's Windows WSL. Nice. I like that that's in my algorithms. This is Windows subsystem for Linux. So such a red flag. I hired someone sometime. He didn't even have this installed. Hadn't even heard of it. Um, but GitHub just doesn't seem to provide this out of the box, which I think is an assumption for writing portable applications. So it's just like, in GitHub you can author your own custom images and run those, but it's just sometimes it was like the decision between like I only really trying to support. I know from prior, because I developed a lot of the software on Windows, that with not a huge amount of work, it's pretty compatible with Windows. I just don't personally care about testing it. All I really care is about, getting these changes pushed into a cloud environment, which, even there, it's like, I think I'm running my tests on Ubuntu. A lot of people be like, why not run on like CentOS or something? Or I think like the Amazon instances are all on CentOS. And yet I choose Ubuntu. But these are all tangential conversations to the goals of today. I think it's more just an update from last time. And I just happen to, which is sometimes live coding helps spot things like how I guess I have via doing merge commits unbeknownst to me instead of squash. I've wound up with bad commit messages. But you discover these things when you try to build in public, and it's fine to just address it and then fix it going forward. And there's some margin I've left myself by having these marked as internal. I haven't yet even done much more than ideation about how to promote these into kind of an open source style distribution, and that's also just tangential to today. So the goals of today kind of look like building a system within WordPress. I don't know if this is going to capture it. I don't know to the extent to which I do or do not even have. Let's see if we can get it in one of these, but I might not have this even diagrammed yet. So basically underlying so this is the WordPress architecture. So basically the product that's being built is called Casa. It's going to be a CRM based product for freelancers. It's going to be pretty much a freemium model, and that the idea is that you're benefited by having integrations from your WordPress backend into things like Stripe, ClickUp. What other integrations do I have? SendGrid, Zoom, Google Calendar, and to be able to have just one place where you can do all of these things. And there's like some products like Wix in the market that a lot of people seem happy with, but it's kind of, I see a worth in building this type of thing anyway, just because like people that build on, due to Wix being kind of closed source and due to like the low cost or low budget of most of those sites, you're just never going to find a market of developers for it. So I think that there's good reason to just build in WordPress. So there's a unit of work right now where, let's see if we can pull this up. I don't know how I'm going to even get into this thing. There's a unit of work to basically take an old blog of mine. Let's try to find it. It's probably here. Old block. And I don't even know the state of this working or not working right now, since I've been doing a lot of different database migration stuff. Let's go try to find. So a lot of people would look at WordPress and say, like, why are you using that? And I actually picked up from someone recently that WordPress is trying to modernize itself. Uh-oh. Headphones dropped. So WordPress is trying to modernize itself, which is interesting. They are now going to redo the entire backend in React, which is interesting. Let's see. This is the right one. Now we just need to make sure that the WP config points at it. But it still maintains that there's a lot of really useful stuff you can do in WordPress with a plugin called Advanced Custom Fields. And what you kind of get out of using that tool is basically like CRUD style. I don't know what the heck the user is. CRUD style. This is so bad. CRUD style API. CRUD style like entity creation, and then you get kind of like a pre-built API on top of that. So if your goal is to build out something as like tangled and as complex as this, what you get out of Advanced Custom Fields is basically like a WYSIWYG, and then you have kind of a very tried and tested system, although it's written in PHP, so you do have to get in there and write some PHP. But there's just nothing that even comes close, in the realm of JavaScript. And people complain about PHP, and that's a whole separate subject of like typed languages versus rapid prototyping languages, which is a big old elephant these days with things like TypeScript and what have you. And I'm using PHP my admin even. That's funny. I sometimes do use MySQL Workbench. It just depends, if I'm working with other people. But this is a 15-year-old tool, at least I would say, and it works. And that's all I care about. So, if you can speed up development time, that's most of what matters. Okay, so this is just not that confusing, but maybe a little. Yeah, I think so. So bad. So I'll spend some time probably trying to get this stuff sorted. So right now, the basic objective is to migrate an old blog. So the new, let me see if I can get this up. The new backend that I've come up with, and there's some broken images here, but I already have all of the different boxes that are kind of described in this diagram. They're all kind of already here. So if we go to like payments, and I don't know to the extent that this is fleshed out, but if we clicked on, there's nothing for payments yet. We could try payment types. So there's like, this is what Advanced Custom Fields basically allows you to do. And this is probably pretty one-to-one with Stripe. In Stripe, they would call this like a product. Discounts probably did that already as well. So yeah, these are the types of things that you can then access over the API, and so you can kind of build. I think the language that they use in industry is now called like a headless CMS. So you'd have this kind of thing with Shopify. And it's definitely the direction. WordPress, I think, introduced its REST API probably in 2017, 2013. When did they intro it? And so I think that, so this was maybe 2016. Oh. All right, so 2016. So this is like, I mean, now that's like 6 years ago, but you know, basically all the other big systems followed suit. Um, and I think that allowed them to circumvent how PHP could be arguably a pretty limited way or limiting factor for WordPress's like continued existence. All right, so I thought I had hooked this up to the right database. Let's try this again. So if we go to mikewit.com/old, it was just mikewit old blog, and then that's probably correct. So yeah, it redirected to that, which is I guess incorrect. So my background with WordPress is a long ago, 2010 type of long ago. Worked a little bit as kind of like an intern with the team directly. So I got to, then after that I was a WordPress consultant. So a lot of this is like, pretty familiar to me. Is another reason I went with that tool. And so one of the things you often get into, so we notice like, I don't know, it's small, but as soon as they go old blog WP admin, it link corrects it to the wrong place, which is not that big of a deal. But so what I was working on prior to this live stream in this area is this function. So transferring, what happens is in the database dump, you have everywhere in, it's going to be probably hard to find. I'm not going to be very good at finding this. Terms, top menu. We want like Germata, terms, taxonomy, those options. This is probably it. Yeah, so this is where it sets the site URL. And so the script that you typically want to write is you want to have the site URL. You often, that's why it's triggering that refresh, or sorry, that redirect. So you basically want any kind of transfer script to alter this, and you'll have like, it will go pretty deep in that. Like even your plugins in WordPress will write, they will write this site URL. So that's why, I think there's reasons if you went out there and searched like transfer WordPress SQL export or something, and you do site URL, you'll find stuff that comes up for it. And then if we searched SQL, something like this. Yeah. So that could be. Not really giving us what we want with that. This is just renaming the database tables, I guess. Which is not necessary. That's just because it's a multi-site tutorial. And I'm sure there's all kinds of different tools that have kind of cropped up. They're all probably doing the same base thing. So far, this is kind of horrendous. This is the problem with WordPress, is you have a lot of people that just, and this is why a lot of people, I guess, in the industry complain about it, is because you just have, it's not misinformation, it's just non-technical people, which nothing wrong with that, except it just can make finding solid information difficult. Yes, this is a step, but we're still not here. Yep, this is it. It. How many stars? It's not a ton, but this is sometimes why my canonical examples, like, do you use somebody else's tool or do you build it by yourself? And sometimes, like, I know what the thing to do here is, and it's just sometimes you search for a tool, and it's just like such a pain that. All right, so this is at least on the WordPress website, which is better. Yeah, so this is probably the most official. Yeah, so so it's kind of in a way like redoing that work, but because what I like to have in my tools is I like end-to-end automation. But yeah, you probably exactly right here. So this is basically doing a regex on your exported database, um, which is what you want, and that's what you need to do to transfer a WordPress site. So right now, where this is at is I have a export tool that I've coded up. I've exported. This is the old database, even though I think it's titled as new. And basically, right now it's just proving out uh, one script. Um, and sometimes when I get into like a new problem area, I'm sometimes just coding stuff that um, that's that just kind of makes the system comprehensive. I'm not necessarily driving at solving for something. So if we go back to that script right here. So right now, transfer site URL. Let's see what this is doing. I think right now it's just doing an export, and then where I was at was, I believe, it's right here. This is the output of that export function. So then what we want is we Right. I believe it's one of these. So with these exports, this is just a separate thing I was trying to articulate before. I don't have diagrams, so I have one of the products I just don't have diagrams for. I call that product InfraCloud, and InfraCloud is responsible for all kinds of provisioning problems. So notably, um, one of the biggest areas that has received some development so far is in provisioning of LAMP in a cloud environment, and then provisioning of WordPress. So one of the functions that like InfraCloud does is doing routine backups of databases, and then I had to make a hard choice, which could have been a $15,000 type of mistake, arguable. I could have just offloaded the routine backups to Amazon RDS. The problem with doing that is that I knew I wanted to build a REST-based replication layer within WordPress, because there's a lot of business logic sometimes when you're not just replicating and creating copies from one database to another, which RDS lets you pay the cost to jumpstart. You're doing things like a customer buys, let's say, a specific business operations template, which I kind of define what that looks like for the Casa product here. Maybe. I hope it's the right one. Or maybe that's here. So, I have different segments, have different things that get provisioned for it. And then in the back end too, we have things that we've kind of anticipated. So under like services, let's say you bought the graphic design template, you would get pre-canned services that you hopefully make your life easier to just go in and edit the content for. So when you're doing like one-to-one replication, this kind of is a different use case, because you kind of are more like checking that a user has paid for the thing, and then you're kind of replicating data from like a master copy into the user copy. And in those cases, that's where replication that's like would be handled by RDS doesn't really cut it. So you kind of would need to code all this stuff anyway, sort of. And you can make arguments against it. But then the other thing is that Amazon RDS winds up being like one of, if not the most expensive product in the AWS catalog. So you're paying roughly a 2x multiple on whatever you'd pay for an underlying EC2 instance. So, it's always better to minimize what you have going on in terms of replication. But the other area that I kind of knew I wanted to go custom, either had already started the work for doing these exports, or I just felt that here, let's do something else. I just had felt strongly that if I wanted to scale databases to some kind of like big data mining type of operations, your Amazon just will scale that cost with you, and you'll just eat the cost in crazy kinds of ways if you don't build your own custom infrastructure. Plus, you're tying yourself to Amazon's ecosystem that way. So, all right. So basically, like right now, there is I think we want this meta file, which gives a table of lookups. And then what we need to do is traverse all of these files, replacing, where is it? The new site URL. So I've already tested it. Transfer site using file. So you define a SQL file, and then you define I think think about this. Site URL. Yeah, so the constraint of this, I guess, is that this is going to need to get concatenated, which may run into issues, but let's try it. All right, so this is probably going to live inside of here, probably going to live inside of here, and we'll do something like MySQL dump request, export to so inside of this export function, we will now probably just run straight concatenation all of these files. So we'll do just make sure we're outputting audio. That's great. Let's do that, and then we will sync. Yep, get this the full path. All right, and then we will do something like we want that database name. The DB. All right, and then call this like result DB file equals DB file, and we want to do fs write file sync. Yep. All right, and now go back to this function, and what the heck is it doing? Just transfer site URL. Great. And then we want this to be const DB file. Then we want to be able to say describe as the DB file. And then let's go back here. Type string. Fine. Name, string, type, description. All right. All right, and then it's a old blog. Actually, no, it's this specifically. Yeah, I believe so. And then I guess we'll do that trailing slash, which I don't know. Probably should do like a double check here. So if r's name ends with Yeah. All right. I don't know to what stuff like that can often matter with URLs, um, just because like there's other places where concatenation could occur, and if you don't have a trailing slash or maintain formatting, you could just wind up in just a weird place where, in the worst case, you have to just nuke the whole database. All right. So console info. Yeah. All right. And now just run that. I mean, I would have liked to have seen that message. So there's a lot of yeah, I know where that's getting messed up at. Wish I would have just okay right here. All right, so it's passing that in correctly. Result outputs not iterable, which is probably right in dump class. And then clearly we want that. All right, so it's async. That's probably the issue. And then there's this other idiosyncrasy. So, like I had kind of mentioned, to do with not relying on RDS replication. You know, one of the reasons that once you scale to a certain type of once you scale your databasing, you can arrive at a requirement for splitting your database sessions across regions, which is called sharding, and being able to merge different shards together. I think requires some delicate setup of your basically every table in your database. So basically, that's where these error messages are coming from. It's expecting there to be a last modified field, and then where that is happening is probably right here. And then get columns, get structure, probably right here. Last modified. So there is this function that I've coded. And I think last live stream I talked about how, you know, you should always angle to get your lowest cost quality product to market. And I think a lot of people write code in a way that compromises quality, and they generate a lot of stress for themselves. You know, I'm probably someone who's more at risk for over engineering, but then I try to make the case that, you know, what you want is you want to be able to like go and understand, you want to be able to build things incrementally and engineer it so that when you go to do other things, like right now with this current task, you know, you have most of the nuts and bolts that you need already there. You want to have that experience, I think, more often than not, which is the result of engineering software over just like slinging software to build a prototype. You want to be in the business of like reliably transferring bits throughout your system. You don't want to be in the mode of like proving flow in one area, and then as soon as you pivot to like change the flow, everything breaks and you have to like reinterpret, you know, how you set up things. So crazy way this could work. Let's see. structure. All right, so we'll rerun this script. Because what we want is we just don't want this level of verbosity. All right, so we're going to do structure.columns. I think we're going to have to do find val. Find index. Yeah. Sure. All right. And hopefully that cleans up. Doesn't clean it up, does it? Because that's the wrong test. Whatever. All right, so that should clean up the error messages. And it's not really telling us where this file is. And even worse, it just wrote it to the root directory, which is just fine, but it's kind of irritating, I guess. It wrote it to the current working directory, rather. So, DB file. So this instead, what was it? Dir name, probably. All right, dir name equals, yeah, DB file. So dir name, right there. I'm fine with this. All right. So, you know, the other instances where this type of code is useful is, I guess if you needed to host a WordPress mirror site, you know, you wanted the same domain to serve the same database, like having this type of automation is helpful so that you, here, having this type of automation is helpful. That way you're not doing just 301 redirects, and I think that's going to be more beneficial for SEO. Which, I mean, we could talk about issues to do with that, but you know, you could. It's a tool that's it's an operation that I know I have done commonly enough in the realm of WordPress consulting that having this type of tool, and granted, probably the proper way to do it would be to simply rely on this new WP CLI search and replace. So, you know, it's, and I guess you know, one of the wild things is how you can see it here, where they are talking about simple changes in the URL are problematic. So you could not host your blog on example.test without doing this type of renaming. It just wouldn't work. It would try to redirect it, which is fine if you're doing a 301 redirect. But if you're trying to do something fancy, like host, let's say, a user instance, and that user instance actually, it's like one backend that controls, let's say, 6 of their websites, now all of a sudden, you could try to do some micromanagement at the WordPress post layer. Post layer, the actual content layer in the database. You could try to give them separate backends. Like, I honestly think from like a costing of your storage, I'd just rather see. I'd rather just replicate the database. Like, again, you're just giving that user the ability to have multiple domains, or you're just easing development. Maybe you're just moving from like a local host environment to trying to have your stuff hosted into some cloud. So there's a lot of reasons to have this type of script. You obviously can't use DNS if you're just testing locally, for instance. Okay, so if we go back to this one, so now it has a fully resolved URL. Now go back to WordPress infra, and we can take this DB file, and now we can run this second. This DB file, exactly like that, and then we will console info DB file right there. Boom. So we're going to run that, and then what we should see, since I've already tested this function from last time, cannot read property 1. Null. This is probably saying that the regex failed. Try again. Okay, so it's getting the file, and then probably the regex is failing. So site URL is where it's failing, and then it's trying to here. So this, now we can do this, and then we can do that as well. Try that. That's just fixing regex. So it was like I had a test export, and this export just doesn't have any spaces. So that's probably why it failed. And what we should see is this whole file refresh, and that should change mikewit.com. Let's see. Here's the file, and it should change the mikewit.com to mikewit old blog everywhere, which is good. That's what we wanted to see. And now we should be able to log into old blog. Nope, not yet. That's because we haven't loaded this database back in. So the final step, is, okay, now I believe it's something like, I don't know the extent to which I've coded an import. Sometimes I go and look at like my testing import. Imports. Let's see what we got. So this is basically saying if the database doesn't exist, create it. And then I don't want to add an additional file parameter, because right now what this is doing is it's going to punch through this meta JSON file and then just import all of this. So if you want to override it with just one file, like we're doing here, you can. And then the problem, I think, with this is that if file headphones ran out again, so we'll do it exactly like this. All right, and so then we'll go back to here, and then go to this one, and then dump object. I believe it just gives us the dump object. We just want to make sure it has the import function, because what we'll wind up calling db file. Right there. Boom. Just kick out of that, and then we will wind up calling dump object import db file. And I have some hesitations with this, just because, and I think because in the export I have it set to upsert, so it replaces. So if the value already exists, it just updates it, which is probably going to be suitable. If you're trying to do like a cleaner database swap, it's kind of like what you really should be doing is you should be renaming the database that you're updating, so that there's like kind of a quick undo for the user. And good, so that import function exists. Now let's run it again. So yeah, I mean, you really should be renaming the database so that you have some kind of cookie trail of what you're doing. I think I spoke last time about prioritization, and sometimes it's like it's okay to just do things to shoot. This should have if not exists on the structures. So what we can do, create, it should be an if not exists 100%. So we can do a couple things. Let's try to MySQL dump if not exists, table if not exists. Data schema. Wow, that's just doing a regex, which I just don't like that at all. Skip. Okay, so the other way to do this is to just omit so there's options that I provide in the interface. So if we go to export, let's see. dump request, and then new, and we'll just add options here. And then we'll append that. And then we'll add options here. And we'll append that. And then I sometimes talk about how I use JSDoc. I really think it's a huge gain on readability of code because you're getting some green highlighting, you're creating spacing in between your functions. So when you start to add alphabetization to your functions, which I'm never like perfect about, but so long as you're in the ballpark, you can always just, when you're not sure what to code next, you can always just, clean up your code, add JSDoc, add alphabetization. And the wonderful thing about JSDoc that I haven't integrated yet is with TypeScript, you hopefully gain some kind of static analysis on your code to do error detection. It's just not something I've added yet. But with JSDoc, what you get, most importantly, is you don't have to compile on save. You can just run this when you're ready to, PR it, and then make sure all those errors don't exist. All right, so this options has now been added. So now we can add here, I believe, we would do structure is false, and this will probably fix the error because what's typical in MySQL. So if I went into like the interface and I ran an export, one of the first things it would ask custom, I guess. Is that you'd be able to pick if you want to export the structure or just the data. So I kind of have wrapped the MySQL dump program. I don't know what the heck this is saying. It's clearly saying there's an error, which is fine. And then it's saying AC segments. So this is weird. So what this is doing, so this needs to be outputs in the dump. So this is my bad. If output ends with SQL, does not end with SQL. But this now only has the data. It doesn't have the table creation. And so the only reason I went in this direction was because, well, in other words, I had looked this up because you want this if not exists. And so everyone seems to be saying that they just ran like a regex, which is not ideally not what you want. You don't want to be just running regex. It's fine, I guess, but in this type of case, again, I go back to like my priority right now is just to ship the minimum viable product, and you don't have to cut corners and compromise quality, but you just have to move in a direction that gets product out there. I assume in a way this might have already worked. So again, we're just checking. So now this might quit old blog, and you can test it here. Old blog. Okay, great. So now that allows me to just later. This allows me to just hop into the WordPress, and I'm gonna probably wrap up the live stream there. But yeah, now it's easy to just see where all of my old posts, and then the goal for next live stream. I might progress it between now and then. The goal is basically to have a replication at the API layer for getting this stuff jammed into my custom theme, which looks like this. And then from there will be some interesting stuff going on. In other words, that REST API layer is going to be handy for not only displaying content in the front end, but then doing some of this, like, setting up a user's WordPress with all of the that pre-canned template operations, template content, and then from there, some of the stuff that's in this diagram right here, this massive one, is going to start to open up. And as with all of these live streams, I don't really expect that this is going to take off or go anywhere at the outset. I'm just aiming for consistency. Probably starting next week, I'm going to hit the road. I've been going through a move lately, trying to get myself out of the city and get myself more on the road traveling again, since I did that last year, and it made me kind of happy, very happy. So hopefully, I have other types of content besides just live streaming code, but I think it sometimes is handy as there's gains that I receive just by live coding. But I'm hopeful that this type of content is interesting for other people that just want to understand coding at a high level when you're starting to integrate a lot of systems together, and the level of engineering that you need to code things to in order to not go crazy. And I think one of the themes that will come up again and again is cost. So I mean, this is years of work that's kind of coming together. So I just thought that this is a good moment to share, in the course of my development, because I think that you have a lot of people out there that maybe share sensation, they share clickbait, they share get rich quick, they share, new MVPs that are really just beta level crap. And there's plenty of people that are within the industry that aren't just con artists, that actually believe in engineering stuff. And maybe the content's more boring, but for people that are actually trying to learn, I'm hopeful it'll be kind of a breath of fresh air. I hope not too boring. I haven't personally figured out, other than having a colleague that also live streams coding, I haven't figured out like the most entertaining way to share content. So I think that's why my anticipation is that this content won't take off at the outset. But certainly I think as customer flow and user flow starts to enter into the system, this stuff will become more interesting, as the products become more socialized, because it will be more me talking about, analytics, usage analytics, user feedback, and then some of the, the business cases. Because right now there's definitely customer interviews where I think I'm building something I know people want, but until there's response to actual customer feedback and value creation, I think some of this stuff is going to be a bit dry. But I'm still shooting it because, these are the moments as the product comes together. And I mean, like, really comes together. Like, there's no one of these systems that's like trivial. These are all like massive initiatives that have taken years and years of work. So sharing this stuff, I think, hopefully creates, informative value to people, that maybe even if it's only going to be looked at in hindsight, it's going to be useful and interesting. So that's all I got. And I'm sure whether it's next week or a year from now, if you leave a comment in this video with a question, I'll be happy to try to answer it my best. Take care.